Okay, hello and welcome to the WINDSOR framework, what impact for the trade in goods. This is a 1-hour webinar dedicated to the WINDSOR framework. So welcome to the WINDSOR framework, what impact for the trade in goods. This is a free webinar on the 7th of March 2023. So just about a week after the proposals were made. So you can imagine how busy we were. Now, a quick word before we start. I've prepared an extensive set of slides for you. And when I mean extensive, I mean extensive. So there's a lot of text on there. And the reason is that I believe in reusing the PowerPoints afterwards. And I don't want you to write down thousands of things. So I'm not the one that gives you a bullet point and then that's a PowerPoint presentation for you. And you've got to write down in order to follow. No, you should get comprehensive slide pack that you can then reuse a little bit later on. So therefore, there's more on the slides than you would traditionally see. The second point, I love interaction. We're gonna use the chat. You can ask all the questions you want in the chat. There might not be so much time to answer them directly now, but next Monday, with the trade update that you're gonna get for week number 10, there's going to be an attachment and that answers all the questions. So do keep them in, we will read them, and I promise you I'll answer each and every one of them. Next up, yeah, that's actually, so I love the interaction, but we won't be doing polls or anything like that, like others do. And the reason is we have a lot to get through and very limited amount of time. So with that said, let us get started right away. I know you can see my screen, so let's do it. This 1-hour webinar is part of a 4-hour extensive training that we have last week updated to account for the WINDSOR framework. We've been running it successfully for the last 2 years, and it is a half-day intensive training course on how to trade with Northern Ireland. It's about understanding the Northern Ireland Protocol and its implication, moving goods from GB to NI, learning about how to move goods from NI to GB, then cross to the EU. We're going to do Dublin to Belfast, we're going to do Belfast to Liverpool, and so on and so on. The next course is on the 12th of April if you're interested. It's only 4 hours, it's an intensive course, half a day, with very little breaks, but lots of information, so you can still go back to the office. If you want to know how all of that works, the detail is in the link below. And one last thing before we get started, for this hour, there's a special deal that we've got going on. If you want to upgrade to the full version of our trade intelligence offering, you know we offer a free update on trade intelligence update every week. But if you want the clickable links and the supportive documents like spreadsheets, official document analysis, PPT, etc. for your work and to use for your team, then you can now get, for this 1 hour, 65% off the price of the annual subscription, putting it down to £99 for the whole year rather than the usual £365, £1 a day. So if you want it, just email throughout this hour info@customersmanager.org, and the subject line is the WINDSOR framework, and we'll be in touch for all details. And this is what you're going to get if you're a full subscriber. You're going to get all of these informations with our update on Monday. The full slides, the 10-page plus report, the legal text, the opportunity to add the helpline, and add legislative updates as well. So today we're going to talk about the WINDSOR framework, and I've been asked specifically by some of you to just reflect quickly on the current rules, because if we understand the current rules, we can understand what the changes are. Now, as I've said, this is going to get quite technical. This is going to get very geeky because it aims at customs and global trade professionals, right? So if you're none of that, then, you know, this might be a little bit over the top for you, but hey, let's see. So challenges with the implementation, what are the issues at the moment? Then the WINDSOR framework, the agreement in principle for Northern Ireland. It's quite long, WINDSOR framework for Northern Ireland. The timetable, your questions, and then conclusion. All of that in the next 55 minutes. Whoa. So therefore, I will speak quickly, and therefore it is it is on. Yeah, there's no better. Mute your phone, don't take any calls, don't look at your email. Just for the next 50 minutes, focus on this and it'll be all right. So what are the current rules under the protocol, the Northern Ireland Protocol, or the Northern Ireland Protocol for the trade in goods? Again, trade in goods, there's more to the protocol than just that, but for now it's the trade in goods that we are concerned with. So you know what the original objectives of the Northern Ireland Protocol were. Don't need to rehearse them all again, but it is about the hard border that can't be happening between the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland for all those political reasons. But also we need to ensure from the EU side, it's about protecting the single market. And from the UK side, it's about having a UK internal market that is functional and where there's no difference between Belfast and trading between Liverpool and Belfast and London and say, I don't know, the Isle of Wight, for example. So it is about making sure there is a place of Northern Ireland in the internal market of the UK, as Northern Ireland is part of the UK, and it is not conceivable to have a different treatment to parts of your own country. As I tell the Germans very often, what would happen if I would put a border between Bavaria and Baden-Württemberg? I mean, that would be crazy, right? Except you like that kind of stuff. Anyway, so we need to bring Northern Ireland back into the UK, which has been felt to be been separated, and so therefore we now need to get an agreement going whereby that is possible. After 2 years, we have understood that the rules and regulations of the EU, the Union Customs Code, and the regulations for official controls of the EU apply to goods arriving in Northern Ireland. And that's quite complicated because there are also excise rules and VAT rules that partly apply in Northern Ireland. It allows goods to flow from and to Northern Ireland and the EU and the Republic of Ireland as they did before Brexit. And therefore it is said that Northern Ireland can benefit from full access to the single market, although not being part of the single market, a really unique construct. And that means no paperwork, no customs check, something that's unheard of. So this is a unique position for Northern Ireland, and one that you better benefit, you better safeguard, because that's a big market. However, you also know that there is a problem as regards the Belfast agreements and the aspiration of the unionist movements, which feels that they've been undermined, and that the East-West trade dimension of the agreement has been downgraded. So therefore, there are concerns about the implementation and, of course, the democratic governance of Northern Ireland's place in the UK, and that has to be addressed. And so the practical result of this tension was the collapse of Stormont, the Legislative Assembly in Northern Ireland. So if we look at the traditional flows, which are Northern Ireland to Ireland or the EU, Northern Ireland to Great Britain to Northern Ireland, and then third country goods to Northern Ireland. If we look at the simplest form right now, we have goods from the Republic of Ireland and the EU, goods into the Republic of Ireland and the EU from Northern Ireland, no customs obligation. The default is business can continue as it was before Brexit. Essentially, you treat Northern Ireland as a member of the EU. Now, this would be very contentious if I was a politician, but I am not, so therefore, customs declarations are in this scenario unnecessary for the goods moving directly from Northern Ireland to the EU/the Republic of Ireland. Now, as you have heard, the vast majority of goods going to Northern Ireland, however, do not come from the EU, they come from Great Britain. If you, however, do engage in that trade, Republic of Ireland goods and Northern Ireland goods, and you exchange those, then there might be intra-stat declarations that you might have to deal with, just like you would do as an EU member, so to speak. And there are some VAT challenges that you might want to be thinking about. There is this requirement of having an XI prefix UK VAT number. You can account for that as intra-EU movements. The OSS and the IOSS scheme also apply. This is something that applies if you're an EU member state as well, and you're trading with a third country, well, then you have the IOSS obligations. So there's a bit of VAT administration here, but it is manageable, I suppose. However, if you move goods from Great Britain to Northern Ireland, what you really want is unfettered access. And actually, that probably should have said Northern Ireland to Great Britain rather than Great Britain to Northern Ireland, because here we're talking about goods that move from Northern Ireland to Great Britain. That's also very easy, actually, because under this scheme, this qualifying Northern Ireland goods scheme, goods move to Great Britain with unfettered access, as you know. So that means there's no customs declaration, there's no export declaration, no import declaration, no customs duty, no VAT, no changes, right? So from Northern Ireland to Great Britain, boom, it's pretty straightforward. And there are limited exceptions where an export declaration needs to be submitted. But as you can already see, there's still a bit of friction here. There's still a different treatment for Northern Ireland as it would be for the rest of Great Britain. Yeah, so this is then the particulars. If you are moving goods that start in the EU and they end up in Great Britain, well, then obviously you wouldn't qualify for unfettered access. So given that there is no border, you could move your goods from Dublin to Liverpool, and if you were to declare them as Northern Ireland goods, then they would move without control. But you're not allowed to do this, obviously, if you want to avoid controls. So this is what this slide says here. And then if you are going to move goods from Great Britain to Northern Ireland, then this is going to be the problem child, isn't it? Essentially, you have to treat Northern Ireland like a third country to Great Britain in the trade of goods. And that means all of these things that you've experienced over the last year. So it means you need to have an EORI number with XI, you need to make customs declaration, including providing the full EU commodity code duty deferment. So you're treating Northern Ireland really like a member state of the EU and therefore a third country to Great Britain, which it isn't. The trade measures in theory also apply unless they've been unilaterally disapplied. And of course, you have to eventually pay, you may have to pay customs duties unless you can prove that the goods are not at risk for moving into the EU. And you can reduce customs duties through the use of the EU-UK FTA and possibly other trade agreements that may apply. Now, that all sounds not like an internal market trade. All of these aspects, customs declarations, proving the status of goods, so to speak, are all associated with third country trade, not internal market trade. So therefore, you can understand why there is a problem raised here. Yeah, you've got to make use of GVMS, which again wouldn't happen in an internal market. You deal with EU tariff rate quotas if available and necessary. You have to use CDS to lodge customs declaration unless you're using the TSS service. You have a wide range of documentation that you need to be able to supply at short notice, and you might need to consider SPS rules carefully and the regulations for agri-food trade, the official controls as per EU regulations, or for a region that is part of a different country. I mean, it's odd. And if you think that these SPS rules are actually not that big of a deal, just look at this. This is official guidance from the UK. This is not me making this up. They're all live links. So if you want to find out what the rules are for moving these products into Northern Ireland from GB, well, then here they are. And as you can see, it's extensive. So if you're trading meat, or if you're trading beef, veal, eggs, whatever, good luck. It's not easy. So the challenge with the implementation, you know it. I don't need to rehearse it because if you live in the UK, this would have been on your...
Northern Ireland remained in the EU.
Mute yourself, guys. Mute yourself, please. Otherwise, I'll have to stop this and mute you. Thank you. So the challenges you already know, right? So it's about the treatment of the movement of goods. There are other challenges that I can't get into, but you know that we have burdens that disrupt the East-West trade. I've just shown you the red tape and the checks for internal UK trade that you need to go through. Yes, there is a provision in the protocol that calls for, or that allows for, tariff-free trade. It's even that is already complicated. But you are in a situation where you might not pay for the tariff, but you have a lot of red tape. So these are called burdensome third country processes that need to be avoided. And the key ones are the officially signed certificates for individual food products. Again, we're talking SPS controls, and then customs declarations, even on consumer parcels. And the burden here is that we have full requirements for multiple declarations, checks, and in some cases, even rules of origin requirements. And that also has an impact on the administration because HMRC needs to monitor all this and needs to control all this. For agri-food, each individual product requires costly, officially signed and highly detailed certificates and extensive checks with associated delays and charges. Now, I'm not going to go through all of these challenges in the area of SPS, but you understand that if we are saying that the island of Ireland is one epidemiological area, so one SPS area, one controlled area, then anything that comes out away from the Republic of Ireland, so to speak, would need to be controlled. And this explains why Great Britain is treated differently, as Great Britain does not adhere to the SPS rules of the EU. But that creates your border in the North Sea. So therefore, we have a lot of red tape. We've got 500 officially signed certificates. We've got lots of costs. We've got physical checks. They all need to be enforced. They all need to be carried out, creating a lot of administration burden and delays. I don't even want to talk about laboratory testing. And there are even some products like sausages and seasoned lamb joints that would be banned altogether if we would to continue this route, and we would have a rigid implementation of the protocol. So all of this to say, we really have a good case for changing the protocol. Okay. There are many other cases, including in the area of VAT and excise, and of course the democratic deficit. And one of them that also is really important is the fact that standards are followed by the EU rules in Northern Ireland and not the UK rules. And this is not compatible with the idea of one internal market. These are all the other problems that exist that we could talk about for a long time, but we don't have that much time. So we'll have more time in the 4-hour training if you're interested. One of the key things that is very important for the EU is the protection of the single market. Because if we're going to change the rules and we're going to make it easier for East-West trade, how are we going to make sure that the North-South trade is not negatively impacted? If we are extending the rules of GB to NI, well, then we have divergence between NI and EU, ROI, right? So are we creating now a border between Northern Ireland and an economic border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland? So what about the WINDSOR framework then? What's been decided? Well, look, so much we could say, all of which we're not going to do. We're going to focus on the trade of goods exclusively. This is going to get quite complicated. I stuck to the words that the officials used. I'm not changing it because this is a proposal and it's already complex as it is. And it will help us if we understand what they are saying in order to know what we now need to be doing. So what about the WINDSOR Framework Agreement? The first question I got from you is this a new agreement? Is the old protocol scrapped? And is there a new protocol in place now? And the answer is no. There is no new protocol. Any talk of a new protocol is futile. What we're doing is we're doing several things within the existing framework. We're changing the treaty itself, so we're calling it a treaty change, but we're really only changing the protocol, which is an annex of the withdrawal agreement, which is an internationally binding treaty. So we're changing Article 6.2, and that puts out the ECJ, where we are talking about GB-NI trade. So there's no more role for the European Court of Justice. For GB-EU trade via NI, the ECJ is the sole court that matters. So it is this idea of red and green lanes. If you're on the green lane, any legal dispute go to international arbitrage. If you are on the red lane, your legal disputes will go to the ECJ. There will be a new basis for VAT and excise arrangement, and that will allow Northern Ireland to have similar or follow the changes that Great Britain's making in the area of excise and VAT. And that makes sense because you can't really have one country and different excise and VAT regimes in different parts of the country. And of course, there's the storm and break, which will be embedded into the legal text. Alongside these treaty amendments, there are other legally binding changes to establish this agreement. So there is a new EU law on the movement of goods and agri-food. So the EU will make a law and put it into EU and the EU acquis. That then changes the way the Northern Ireland Protocol operates. There are also then legally binding joint committee decisions. As you know, the joint committee meets and makes decisions. So they have drafted these joint committee decisions, and that puts in place this green lane and red lane and makes the above treaty changes then. And then there are further declarations by the UK and by the EU with effective international law, and that then gives you this entrenched fettered access even from GB to NI and other important protections. So there is talk of a new protocol, but it is not a new protocol. The WINDSOR agreement is based on the Brexit agreement, which includes the protocol, the withdrawal agreement. And it says in Article 164 that the joint committee decides how to fix any mistakes, omissions, or problems that no one saw coming, such as this one. The protocol itself could only, according to the rules, be changed for 4 years after the transition period. Okay, so we need to be smart in the way we make the changes. So what are these changes then? Well, NI to GB is the easiest again. Goods moving from Northern Ireland to Great Britain will not require customs procedures as they do now, except in a minimal amount of cases where the EU is required to check exports, CITES, etc. In these cases, it's the UK that will carry out the checks. The EU has international obligations concerning firearms, hazards, chemicals, etc., and therefore that needs to be a check. So what do we see? We already see NIGB, no change, which also means it's still an export. Still an export. GB to EU via NI, that is your red lane. Goods moving from Great Britain to Northern Ireland destined for the EU or at risk of entering the EU will be subject to complete customs checks and controls, which means just what it says, it is complete. So therefore, a full customs declaration needs to be lodged, including a 10-digit CN code, including payment of duty, etc. So if you are going to the EU, that is the normal procedure, and that is what needs to happen. Now to the fun bit, GB to NI. Okay, so we are talking, if we listen to the UK, we have gotten it all. We achieved incredible things because now the internal flow between GB and NI is going on the green lane, and therefore there's nothing we need to do. It is just like moving from A to B in the UK, and the example that the UK uses is moving from one part of the island of Great Britain to the Isle of Wight, which is part of Great Britain, but it's an island. Now, what the EU is saying is this. So if you want to move Great British goods to Northern Ireland, then this is how you do it. Goods moved by trusted traders from Great Britain to Northern Ireland, those that are not at risk of entering the single market, can benefit from these new arrangements. So we're going to look at the arrangements now. But it is important to qualify this by saying, well, there's a trusted trader thing, and the goods continue to be not at risk. And that means we need to figure out what other criteria have they changed for goods being not at risk, and how do I police that? And on top of that, I layer in this concept of trusted traders. So first, I need GB companies to be trusted. Then they need to make sure that the actions that they take or the goods they transport better are not at risk for entering the single market. And if you do that, these two things, you need to be trusted and your goods stay in Northern Ireland, and you can make sure they do. Then you get to go on the green lane. If you don't, you go on the red lane, and then you know what happens there. So how does the UK read this? So this is what I read from the summary. By going onto the green lane, by going on this new UK internal trade scheme, you then have no paperwork or less paperwork, less checks, and no duties. And the focus is on commercial information rather than customs processes or complex certification requirement on agri-food. So we have this problem whereby on one side we have this internal trade scheme where you're on a green lane, but on the other hand, the EU is still writing that they're doing customs declaration. So that's really weird. How does this then work? So the first thing to understand is that we have a UK trusted trader scheme, and that is going to be expanded to cover more businesses across Great Britain. When you apply to be a member of the trusted trader scheme, you then at this point tell HMRC or whoever you apply to, what are the traditional goods that you're going to be sending to Northern Ireland on a regular basis. That could be a list of 5 products or 5,000 products. I don't know. But the point is, they need your description of the product, or you may want to provide the commodity codes with them. So upon application, you're telling them every week, every month, every whatever, I'm going to be sending any of these products that I annex for you to Northern Ireland. That's important. So one application and one provision of commodity codes. Of course, they can change. I understand that. Okay. Please mute yourself, Brian, wouldn't you? Otherwise, yeah, you might be, yeah, we might be all benefiting from your views. Scrap burdensome supplementary declarations. So this is all what the UK says is going to happen and is going to be beneficial. But the EU is saying is that goods that don't have a chance of getting into the EU will benefit from a first of its kind reduction, but not a complete removal of requirements of customs restrictions for businesses moving directly from Great Britain to Northern Ireland. So how are we going to get around this? How do we make sure that the EU protects the single market and we still treat NI differently without treating it any differently? As before, the key concept, besides the trusted trader scheme, to understand is that goods imported from Great Britain to Northern Ireland can either be subject to processing in Northern Ireland or not subject to processing in Northern Ireland. Goods not subject for processing in Northern Ireland are not at risk of entering the EU. So if you can show that your goods are not subject to processing, then your goods are not at risk for entering in the EU, and they go into the green lane. And where the goods are subject to processing, so where in Northern Ireland something is being done to the goods, then you can call that commercial or non-commercial. So I may process goods, but not for the idea of onward sale into the EU. Or I may process them for something non-commercial and then that is not at risk for resale into the EU, and therefore not at risk, and therefore green lane. So if I have goods that are processed and they are not to be commercial, then there are conditions that need to be met. So either your processor has a low turnover below a certain level, or you are part of certain industries that have been exempted. If you are exempted, it means your processing that you are doing is not counted as being commercial processing for onward sale into the EU, but it is processing that is not commercial. So you need to establish where do you fall. So to repeat, this is quite crucial. Either your goods that you bring to Northern Ireland are subject to processing or they're not. If they are, they're either commercial or they're not commercial. If they're not commercial, green lane. If they are commercial, red lane. Red lane duty, full customs declaration. Green lane, light touch. Green lane means not commercial processing. It means you're either supplying retail food to customers in Northern Ireland, you're doing construction in Northern Ireland, you're processing something for incorporation into Northern Ireland, you are processing something for use in the healthcare service industry in Northern Ireland, you do non-for-profit processing for non-for-profit, or you do processing to use as animal feed in Northern Ireland. Only goods that are processed non-commercially on this basis can be moved by trusted traders. So in addition to having shown that your goods are either not processed or processed but not commercial, you are required to be a trusted trader. Here I have listed again out of the law, the proposed law, what it means to be subject to processing for goods that are not commercial. And there you see it, right? The key point is that now the annual turnover of the people of the person that's lodging the declaration has been increased from £500,000 to £2 million. So a lot more people would now qualify for goods subject to processing that are not commercial. And if you fall into that category, you go to the green lane. Yeah, so criteria 1 is this financial turnover point. Criteria B is you're in one of those 5 possible sections. So if you want to use this, you need to show that you are a trusted trader. This is what the UK tells them or tells us on their website. If you are a trusted trader, you will benefit from reduced duty, reduced checks, and most importantly, there should be no customs declaration anymore because you can use the trader support service. The trader support service will then do it for you. They will use your ordinary commercial data. They will use certain information that the TSS needs, for example, from sale invoices and transport contracts, if you want to share that with the trader support service. And from that, I understand, they will make the customs declaration and lodge it into the TSS system, which then functions as the customs declaration for entry into Northern Ireland. In other words, the TSS is here to stay. The documents you're going to be uploading are the commercial documents. The TSS is going to do something that does meet the requirements, lodging a customs declaration. That should be much faster for the TSS people as well. Or they will help you prepare it, and then you still have to prepare it. If you still have to prepare it, then you still have to make a customs declaration. It is just going to be a reduced, super reduced data set. Somebody has to make a customs declaration. It's just a fact. So you've got to be a trusted trader. You've got to make sure that the goods are in the green lane, and you still have to do a customs declaration, albeit at a much lower reduced 2%. And you can use the trader support service to help you do it. And that should mean that you should only use your commercial records, but still you would need to either input that into a system, into a web page, or you have an API feed that kind of uploads it. There was a supplementary declaration that you need to do. There was a full customs declaration you needed to do, depending on the chosen method of importing into Northern Ireland. That will now no longer be necessary. So as a trusted trader, you can take advantage of this new reality. But you need to be a trusted trader, and to be a trusted trader, you need to be trustworthy. It is for the UK government to decide who is a trusted trader. You must register with the UK authorities, meet all the requirements, and give the list of the commodity codes. Give a list of the items that you usually sell. So this serves so that they can check that what you are sending is not at risk of moving into the EU. They will look at your pattern and see if you are potentially moving to the EU quite a lot, you got business there and whatnot, or if you have always worked with Northern Ireland. But they're also going to use this list to lodge your customs declaration for you. At least that's what I understand. So this program will be accessible to a broader range of operators, including British businesses, right? If you do that, you will get a reduction of procedures and processes. Applicants will be required to demonstrate that they're in good financial standing, understand the duties and requirements of the program, so that you're not moving to Northern Ireland, to the EU, and that you can accurately identify the commodities they transport to Northern Ireland, particularly those that need a more detailed declaration. So that means you need to provide a list of the goods that you send to Northern Ireland and their commodity code. It will be the UK authorities that are going to perform all of these controls. They're going to be the ones that you apply for that will be running the Trusted Trader program. But it is the EU representatives that will have access to the customs declarations that have been lodged on your behalf, either by the TSS, by yourself. And if you provide only a description of your goods, it will be, I understand, HMRC that will connect your description with the relevant commodity codes. That's what I'm reading from the text. You tell me what you think. So that means you wouldn't need to provide the commodity code anymore. We'll see that in a moment. Anyway, the point is the EU representatives will have access to the customs declarations via a particular customs system established by the United Kingdom, and that's how they will be able to conduct risk assessment and analysis and request inspections of these items as necessary. So the EU says control this, and then HMRC agrees to control this. There is a provision by which the EU and the UK both can suspend the Trusted Trader scheme, in which case we would default back to the current situation, I assume. I wouldn't even want to imagine what happens if that was ever the case. You can read more on these slides. So what is it now that you're going to get for being part of the Trusted Trader program? Okay, so only goods handled by reputable businesses will be subject to streamlined customs declarations. This includes a considerably reduced number of data fields, 21 elements instead of the more than 80 data elements normally required for customs declarations. So the key messages here are customs declarations stay. They've always been there. They've just been disguised under the TSF. 2, you need to be a trusted trader to benefit from it. 3, you need to have demonstrated that your goods are not at risk of moving into the EU. You do that by showing that goods that are subject to processing are non-commercial. And you can show that they're non-commercial by meeting one of the two, if not the two criteria, either by turnover or by sector. The majority of the information in the customs declaration that you will need to provide to move goods from Great Britain to Northern Ireland include this information. So 21 rather than 80, so you should speed things up. Exporter, importer, mode of transport, weight, production, product description, and item value. So what is the one part that holds you up the most? It's the product description. Well, it is the commodity code. So you can provide a product description, but to find the commodity code might be more challenging. So what is the solution on the commodity codes? Both the EU and the UK use globally agreed upon harmonized system code. No shocking development here. And the commodity codes are pretty similar, if not completely similar right now. GB trade tariff and the Northern Ireland trade tariff are very similar, at least in the first 10 digits. And the NI global trade tariff is the EU tariff. So just call it something else. But all of that means that we would need to provide a commodity code. That's the law. Under this agreement, here's what we do. We're becoming a trusted trader. I'll give you a list with my detailed goods description. Based on this, UK authorities will assist in providing the appropriate CN code. CN code is the word for HS code in the EU for each of the goods. So I repeat, the words are UK authorities will assist in providing the appropriate CN codes for each of the goods. Now, how the UK will do that, we'll see. I guess that we could argue they'll just give you the tariff and you pick it, right? I don't know. But the point is, you give a list of description for this trusted trader program, and then magically the appropriate CN codes are submitted in the customs declaration to the EU. So this is why you annex the list of products that you have when you apply for the trusted traders, and providing that these are the ones that you are providing every other week. The UK authorities will enable the translation from the goods description into CN codes and its transmission to the EU. Let's see what happens here. Goods that are not at risk of entering the EU can be moved by trusted traders. There you have it again. Goods that are not at risk can be moved by trusted trader from Great Britain to Northern Ireland based on a 6-digit CN code. So you need a CN code, except you're not providing it, but somebody else is providing it. I suppose the TSS or HMRC. So you give your list, HMRC will generate your CN codes, has those, and then when you do these declarations, or these, you fill out a little bit of form, because you've already pre-registered your HS codes, they're automatically then populated as the products are submitted to HMRC. The point is, providing a 6-digit code is fundamentally different from providing a 10-digit code. Anybody who followed our classification training, please check out our website, knows this. So take the example of apples. Well, you may just have a CN code for apple or HS code for apple. There's not much more you need to explain in terms of this being an apple. But there are lots of varieties of apples that under a 10-digit code, you might need to explain which variety you're sending. Under a 6-digit code, it's just an apple. So therefore, a 6-digit code is much better than a 10-digit code. But we're not doing away with commodity codes. And for a very limited category of goods subject to specific controls, an 8-digit CN code will still be required. There are different rules for parcel that, because of the time, I won't go into now because time's advancing, and we will cover that in our extensive training, 4-hour training. But you can see here again, trusted trader scheme in parcel shipments is also there. You can read how the parcels are going to be considered when you get a copy of the slide decks next Monday. I should talk about the solutions for agri-food very quickly. So the EU and the UK agreed on new and simplified rules and procedures for the entry into Northern Ireland from Great Britain and certain agri-food retail goods where goods are sent for final consumption in Northern Ireland. And again, it is about this final consumption. There is now a general single certificate for mixed loads for agri-food goods. Now, if you are familiar with the ship supply industry, you know that we're already using that kind of single certificate for our transit goods that we deliver on board of vessels. That similar concept, I understand, will apply here. We'll have one certificate for mixed loads, so we can put everything we want in it. But the point remains, there is a certificate. The identity checks will be reduced to 5%, but only if the safeguards are respected. So remember that the EU's mission is to protect the single market, correct? So they have insisted on safeguards, and in return, they're gonna reduce the checks. They've also allowed that UK public health standards can be applied in Northern Ireland as long as the safeguards are secured, because you will only consume goods in Northern Ireland that come from GB, or GB goods cannot go for trusted trader, won't go to the EU. So therefore, the health standards should apply. No more certificates for organics and wine. And in return, so we have safeguards and we have permanent SPS inspection facilities. So the EU still insists on the construction of these facilities, and here they are. By 2025, we should have these in place. For the EU, it's important to protect the market, and I am here not speaking on behalf of the UK or speaking on behalf of the EU. I speak on behalf of you, the customs and global trade professionals that have to navigate both the EU and the UK. So I'm not going with a one-sided view here. I'm trying to balance it as much as possible. So we need to understand and appreciate that the EU needs to protect its single market, and therefore they have safeguards in place for agri-food. So one is operational SPS inspection facilities and EU representatives that get the access to UK databases to check this. There will be new labeling, so that's a cost, of goods being not in the EU, and that will ensure that the products remain in the single market, remain in Northern Ireland, and do not go into the EU single market. There'll be identity checks. These are then reduced, as I said, to 5% as the labeling requirements are implemented. Monitoring of the movement of retail goods, traceability and listing of the dispatching and the receiving of in authorized establishment, and possibilities to suspend partly or fully facilitation if there are systemic failures of compliance. You put all of this together, the agri-food solutions, the custom solutions, we have a balanced deal, but not one where one has there are rules and obligations, there are facilitations and obligations at the same time. For the EU, there are preconditions and insurances, and that means a trusted trader scheme. That means the goods not at risk determination. That means access to databases. That means risk analysis being able to be carried out. That means if the EU wants an inspection, the EU gets an inspection. And if that happens, there shouldn't be any need for significant checks. Customs declarations will still be required, but they will be significantly reduced, complemented by the TSS service or support whereby a description is given and then the CN code is found by someone else, not by the business. Access to customs databases, and if risks are detected, there are mechanisms to stop it. And businesses and carriers will be involved in the trusted trader scheme, and that is a thing that is subject to authorization and registration requirements. And where such requirements are not met, the participation in the scheme is suspended and terminated. And again, labeling is going to be the most tangible difference that you're going to notice. There will be labeling that is individual on the box, shelf signs, and with posters. And the purpose is to inform consumers that those retail goods are not for the EU, but rather only intended for sale to final consumers in Northern Ireland. And this will also ensure the traceability of these retail goods. So within the sector of retail, we have this labeling. So you should see that in Northern Ireland supermarkets rather quickly. I know what you're going to say. This is going to cost money. This is going to. It's the best we got. It is what was agreed. So you're going to stick a label on that. And this should start this year. And it starts with meat and fresh milk, right? So pre-packed meat has to be individually labeled. Goods sold loose need only be labeled at box level, so apples. And easily visible signs would need to be placed next to the price tag on the shelves in the supermarket. Post-it will also be needed, placed in the supermarket so that consumers know that the goods are not for the EU. To minimize supply chain difficulties, was agreed that labeling would be introduced gradually. As of 1 July 2025, all retail goods will be individually labeled except those not subject to official controls at the border controls. So you see there's a bit of work here to do, but as usual, the meats are in focus. This then means we are reducing the official controls for your SPS measures, as you can see here. So we will bring them down by October to 10%. So as we roll out the labeling scheme, we're scaling back on the official controls. And I talked about UK standards in public health as well, so I'm not going to go into that. But that's a big deal for the EU because it means that certain chemicals, certain products that we use in our sausages that are not authorized in the EU are now authorized in Northern Ireland, and that could be a potential public risk for the EU single market. So that is a big deal, but therefore market surveillance and enforcement activity will be reinforced in order to make sure that these products do not go to the EU single market. And there is rules on plant and animal health, and they will continue to fully apply to prevent the movement of transmissible animal and plant diseases to the EU single market. So there are some official rules and controls that will remain at the EU level. 2 plants, as you can see here, have been also authorized, and they wouldn't be authorized in the EU. So these plants that we're using very proudly in Great Britain today, they can now move to Northern Ireland, although they wouldn't be able to under the current rules. I'm not going to go into VAT and excise, but just to say that there's movement on VAT and excise as well. And this is very important, especially for the sale of alcoholic beverages. And there are minimum VAT rates that can now apply in the UK that are below the EU minimal VAT rates, and that is previously unheard of. So UK VAT for UK products. But again, goods must be not at risk of entering the single market. You can't have a VAT rate that is below the minimum agreed in Europe in the EU. Also, for many of the TRQ questions, quite important, so this is EU tariff quotas. There was a solution found on the movement of the most sensitive categories of steel subject to EU tariff rate quotas from Great Britain to Northern Ireland. There are other subjects to which TRQs matter. Again, the meat is one of those. And so there's an ongoing discussion. We're coming to the end. Let me check the time. We are at out of time. So let me wrap up really quickly here. The timetable you see here, there's a bit of work to do. Also, there's a question of what happens now in the UK Parliament. There's this, the people are considering what their position is, and to the degree that it needs to be voted in the Parliament. In the UK Parliament, it will be voted. Certainly the EU legislative proposals, they need to be voted on by the European Parliament. As regards the changes to the protocol, it is understood that that could happen within the joint committee. And whether that needs a Westminster approval, honestly, I need to double check. If you know, please let us know. I didn't have time to look into what the legal requirements are, whether actually Westminster, I suppose it would be legally and politically impossible not to put it to a vote, but yeah, I need to double check that. So finishing up with your questions, I've selected only 3, but again, if you put your question, and I'm sure you have a lot, in the chat right now, I'm going to get all those questions and you're going to see that in your on Monday as a document for you to download the answers. So the questions I got: Green Lane, do you envision it will be mandatory? It will be mandatory membership of TSS to use the Green Lane and enjoy the reduced customs requirements. I don't think TSS membership is mandatory. Not today, not tomorrow. There is an argument that says, well, if you are not signed up to a automated customs clearance system and you are not self-managing your customs clearance system and you don't want to invest any money in it, then why not go for TSS? It's a trade simplification, but you don't have to. Yeah, so this is a support tool, a layer on top of existing arrangements that supports businesses, particularly smaller businesses, with these additional requirements. And as you've heard, the TSS is here to stay, and the TSS is gonna refocus on what the new requirements are, and you should see a significant reduction of complexity. But as I said, still customs requirements, and to get to the Green Lane, you're not, the TSS is not the issue. It's the Trusted Trader program and proving that the goods that are being processed are not commercial. Security and safety declarations, thoughts are this will be still required for Green Lane movements. As part of the super reduced set, I would agree with you. So I would think that the safety and security elements are part of the super reduced set of data that needs to be provided on all goods moving from GB to NI. And if that is so, then yes, I would agree with you. TSS customs representative for NI for companies, will this be a mandatory requirement? Do we know? Well, we don't know, but we also could think that it is. What we do know, in fact, is that there is a need for a customs representative in Northern Ireland for companies, as there is today. It's in the majority of cases an indirect rep, and that indirect rep is called TSS, and that is going to continue as before. So I don't see there to be much change here. So what are my conclusions? Well, my conclusions are that we have a great opportunity here. It is something that will significantly reduce the amount of red tape and bureaucracy, and it is probably something that within a couple of months we're getting quite used to. A super reduced data set we already know in the EU from summary declarations, and basically that's where we're heading towards now. A super reduced data set that can be managed really easy, but the fact of the matter remains, Northern Ireland is treated differently than GB. And you can call it what you want, the internal market and whatnot. You can try to reduce the administration as much as possible, but the difference is still there. And the collaboration with the EU is so crucial now. The system, only if it's implemented fully, will be effective. Labeling will be the biggest impact, I think, that we will see in Northern Ireland. I can't wait to go to Belfast and see products being labeled not for sale in the EU. That'll be an interesting change. Other than that, I hope that that sets the basis for a more stable collaboration, because as the Northern Ireland minister in Westminster said, if this is not the solution, well, what is? Clear is that without a compromise, we're not going to make this happen. So therefore, if you have an extremist view on where we're going, on either side, right? If you say, no, I need to treat GB as a third country to NI, then that's not going to fly. If you're going to insist that we remove every differentiation and we just let the goods flow as they did before, then that's also not possible. So all of that to say, there are significant simplification opportunities that we need to lock in, I think. We are going to talk about it in much more detail in our 4-hour training. That's as much as I could possibly cover in an hour. So I invite you to join us on the 12th of April for a more substantive analysis of the agreement. By then, we'll also know more. And I hope that you took advantage of the opportunity to sign up to the full update that you get in the calendar, because then you're going to get all the slides, all the answers to your questions. Thank you so much for your time, your opportunity to be here. I will look at all the questions and I will update you in due course. I hope you liked this presentation. If you liked it, then make sure others see it as well. With that said, thank you so much for being there, and I can't wait to see you at one of the next webinars. All the best. Bye.
Thanks, Ollie.